Welcome back. This is Kirsten Mann with Serve Idaho. This is our second webinar where we are going to go over how to train your volunteers. In the first webinar, we went over your organization's message and how to recruit for volunteers. Now that you've perfected your organization's why, let's talk about what to do once they've come through your doors. At the foundation for any successful volunteer program are policies and procedures. A volunteer handbook with outlined policies and procedures will help ensure they fully understand your organization's expectations. Some examples of policies and procedures your organization might want to outline are history, mission, and vision. This is to help the volunteer get a sense of who your organization is. Diversity and inclusion. Volunteer descriptions and expectations. These expectations are really designed for those capacity building volunteer opportunities. You could also develop these with the volunteer. Reasons for dismissal. A photo waiver for all social media platforms. Reporting requirements. An example of this might be timesheets. Reimbursement. The most common form of reimbursement for volunteers is travel reimbursement. Background checks. If your organization works or plans to work with vulnerable populations, such as children, it might be a good idea to have all of your employees and volunteers participate in a background check. There are a couple of free resources such as the State Repository or the National Sex Offender Public Registry. You can also choose to run a more formal background check through your local police office. These costs can usually vary anywhere from $10 to $50. It is also important to include resources where that volunteer can find additional information about your organization, your cause, and contact information of other relevant staff members. If you are unsure of how to create these, there are a ton of resources online. You can also reach out to other nonprofits to perhaps see examples of their policies and procedures. After you've established your policies and procedures, now is the time to train your volunteers. During training, you will want to remember the following. I do, we do, you do. I do. As you are showing the volunteer his or her role, this is also the time when you, as the volunteer coordinator or director, have the opportunity to clearly lay out the expectations for that volunteer. It is also crucial during this time to lay out the point of contact for that volunteer. It can be frustrating for a volunteer to not understand who they should follow up with if they have any questions or concerns. It is also helpful if this point of contact remains the same, as jumping from person to person can lead to confusion. We do. If you have any other volunteers, this is the perfect opportunity for peer mentorship. Bringing in an additional volunteer to help that new volunteer become acquainted with your organization as well as their role will help build a better team. You do. Once your new volunteer has his or her expectations laid out, now is the time to let them take on their new role. During this time, it is crucial to allow for ownership of the project, as most of us do not value the work we have no ownership or control over. This does not mean as the volunteer coordinator you can no longer give your insights and opinions, but perhaps a better way to do this might be through scheduled check-in times. Additionally, your organization should also be counting the number of hours your volunteers are giving, and as well, calculating the value of those hours. This is important for two reasons. One, it will allow you to tell that volunteer the impact of their service, and two, you can potentially use it as an in-kind donation. Additionally, your organization should also be counting the number of hours your volunteers are giving and calculating the value of those hours. This is important for two reasons. One, it will allow you to tell that volunteer and your funders the impact of their service, and two, you can potentially use it as an in-kind donation. There are a couple of different ways you can calculate a volunteer's time. You can calculate the value of a volunteer at their regular rate if they are performing specialized volunteer tasks. For example, if an accountant generally charges $50 an hour for their services and they are donating their time in their capacity as an accountant, you can capture $50 per hour. If they are volunteering as a generic volunteer, you can capture the rate of $21.10 per hour. This is calculated by the independentsector.org. Each state has their own rate, and it typically changes from year to year. It should just be noted that some grants will not allow you to capture volunteer time as match if the volunteers are performing some general duties such as stuffing envelopes, manning a booth, etc. However, it is good to calculate this information to show impact of volunteers to your board and with funders. Always make sure to follow the guidelines of your grant when capturing volunteer time as match. Thank you so much for watching our second webinar, and be sure to check out our last webinar in which we're going to go over how to retain your volunteers after you've trained them.